Thank you for being here tonight for this Education Committee presentation. This is our first public conversation where we're sharing how we're tracking our progress toward important goals. This is part of a new way we're doing things to make sure we focus on helping all our students succeed. Our goal is to be clear about where we are and where we need to improve so that we can be accountable. Tonight, we're focusing on reading skills in third grade. This is an important milestone because third grade is a time when students move from learning to read to reading to learn. Research shows that students who are strong readers by the end of the third grade are more likely to succeed in later grades. Here in Pittsburgh Public Schools, we're also focused on closing gaps in reading skills, especially for our African American students, students who are currently learning English, known as English language learners, and students with special learning needs, known as students with individualized education plans, or IEPs. Last school year, we began using a new curriculum based on the science of reading, which is a body of research to help us understand how children learn how to read. We have a set of challenging but possible goals, and specifically in third grade reading, by the end of the 2024-2025 school year, we want 49.4% of our third graders to be proficient in English language arts on state tests. And to see where we are and where we need to go, we use 3 key assessments: the PSSA, or the Pennsylvania State Assessment. A very small percentage of our students take the PASA, which is the Alternative State Assessment, the Classroom Diagnostic Tool, which is the CDT, and DIBELS Acadience. And together, these assessments give us a complete picture of how our students are doing. The PSSA is a test that measures student progress across Pennsylvania, while the CDT gives us insights throughout the year so we can support students who are struggling early on. DIBELS helps us track foundational reading skills to give focused support when it's needed most. Currently, 46.2% of our students who were third graders last year are proficient in ELA. But we still have work to do, as last year our goal was 47.1% of students to be proficient, and we did not achieve that goal. The year before, we did reach our goal. And these ups and downs are usually normal and tend to get better as teachers and students get used to using our new curriculum, following it closely, and keeping learning at the focus, and them learning more through professional learning or training. Making sure that teachers learn not only about the curriculum, but also about new ways to teach and engage students can help reduce these drops in scores. The data also shows us which areas need more attention. So while our white students have made gains, our African American students, our English language learners, and students with IEPs have shown declines over the last year. And this gap highlights our need to focus on strategies that help each group meet their needs. Let's look more closely at the CDT results of this year's third graders. So we're transitioning from last year's third graders to our current third graders. And the CDT test is given 3 times a year to measure key reading skills. The first round of results show that only 21% of third graders are at grade level, and about 10% are expected to reach proficiency on the PSSA if they took the test at the beginning of the school year. When we look more closely, we see that 22.7% of white students are likely to achieve proficiency, but only 3.8% of African American students, 2.9% of students with IEPs, and 2.2 students who are English language learners are likely to reach this level. This shows where we need to focus on helping different groups of students once again. The DIBELS Acadience results show similar patterns. Overall, 56% of students are at or above benchmark. When we break it down by our subgroups, we see that 41.6% of African American students, 65.8% of IEP students, and 58.3% of students who are English language learners score well below the benchmark, compared to 21.2% of white students. Almost half of our white students scored above benchmark, while fewer African American students, students with IEPs, and English language learners did. And these differences in reading skills highlight areas where we need targeted support to reach all groups. With all of this data, analysis, and information, we're focusing on a plan for lasting improvement through what we call continuous improvement cycles. This means we will be planning, doing, checking, and then acting on what we learn so we can keep improving. By using this approach, we can make changes to help students in real time and adjust our teaching methods as we go. This cycle will help us make sure each step we take is intentional and focused on helping students succeed. Our approach to these challenges includes three main strategies. Strategy one is focused on lesson design. We're using a consistent model for lesson planning to make sure our students are delivering high-quality instruction in every one of our third grade classrooms. And to do so, we're creating visual guides to show what effective reading lessons look like, covering skills, comprehension, and language. And these guides will be in every third grade classroom. Literacy coaches will give teachers training and support to help them teach reading more effectively. Principals and literacy coaches will visit classrooms regularly to see how lessons are being taught and give helpful feedback to make sure we're meeting our goals across the district. Our second strategy is focused on differentiated instruction. Using data from the CDT and DIBELS, we're making sure that instruction is tailored to meet the needs of each student. We're giving teachers a clear process to analyze data and make adjustments based on students' needs. Teachers will also receive training on differentiated instruction and culturally responsive pedagogy, making learning meaningful and inclusive for each student. Teachers will use technology to help personalize learning for students, allowing them to adjust the content and approach to meet each student's level and background. And strategy three is focused on identifying and scaling best practices. We're looking at our best performing schools from the initial CDT to find and share what's working well so we can apply those practices across the district. By observing these schools, we're gathering ideas on teaching techniques that can boost student learning, not only in grades 3, but also in grades 1 and 2. Through professional learning communities, known as PLCs, teachers can discuss and adapt these practices together, sharing ideas that help improve learning. Principals will be part of networks to bring proven strategies into their schools and will support the implementation with additional training. And we will monitor and support schools as they put these practices into action, ensuring that improvements are made district-wide. And so this initial presentation is more than just sharing numbers, but it's a commitment to a new way of governing our schools, focusing on transparency, accountability, and equity. We're working hard to adjust our practices based on the data we have and are doing everything we can to create a brighter future for each and every student. And so thank you, and I look forward to our conversation as we continue this journey to improve Pittsburgh Public Schools for all students. So let's have a conversation.
Thank you. So board members, and I can't see the board members who are online. Can someone see them? Do we have any questions from board members? Okay. Do you have any questions? Okay, Ms. Silk.
Thank you. Thank you so much, first of all, for sharing this, and I'm glad that we are starting this practice of sharing these kinds of updates in this transparent way as we go. Could you speak a little bit more about the specific actions or strategies that you and your team are thinking about now based on this initial set of results?
Sure. So when we thought about strategies, of course, obviously, when we think about it through the lens of continuous improvement, those cycles are short so that we do them quickly so we can learn and progress forward. And so it doesn't hold us into this pattern of remaining in the same space and taking an entire year to implement a strategy, but things that we can find quick wins so that we can see what works and then advance that work as well. And so the first strategy that we talked about or that we presented to the board was really rooted in the creating visuals. So our anecdotal data around the lesson design model, there are 3 components to those bands. And one, of course, is focusing on foundational skills because we know that students are transitioning from learning to read to reading to learn. And so we needed to build capacity there with instructional time dedicated to that. We needed to focus on comprehension and reading, and then obviously writing. And right now, we find that some teachers spend a lot of time on the foundational skills and sometimes do not get to the actual reading and certainly the writing, which are all parts of the assessment as they transition, because they may find that, wow, these foundational skills are not there, so I need to sort of press into that. But we need to balance that approach. And so we feel that if we can visualize the expectation for teachers, build their capacity with our coaches through training and modeling, and then having observations to have feedback, that strategy could be a quick win for at least framing what instruction should look like, utilizing the aspects of the science of reading. The second strategy, yes.
Just a clarifying question. Can you, I'm having trouble visualizing the visual, is this like kind of like a lesson planning document, or is
No,
it is a?
It's actually a poster.
Okay.
It's a poster in the
All right.
room that kind of like, it's student friendly, so the children on the poster. We have the poster designed, but it really calls out about the time allocation and the things that should be happening in that 30-minute to 45-minute block, that 30 to 45-minute block, and then that 30-minute piece, so that we can begin to see the balance in instruction, that where we spend the time on foundational skills and we offer all the tools that you can use in that space around giving teachers some autonomy with that direction, following our scope and sequence, the time that we need to dedicate to reading and comprehension, and the time that we need to dedicate to writing and those tools and intervention practices and things like that. So it's more of a visualization that we can put in the classrooms, but then also not only as a reminder to teachers, but when principals begin their observation cycles and trying to give, supportive feedback on what they could do, that reminder will be there to speak about what lesson design should look like. Going on to the second strategy. So of course, when we talk about disaggregation of data, we see that there are racial achievement and disability disparities in our district. And so differentiated instruction through the work of Carol Ann Tomlinson talks about how we can differentiate content, process, product, and environment. And so we have tools to support that, but we also know that our students, we want to make sure that our teaching is reaching. And so that's where the cultural responsive pedagogy, using the work of Gloria Ladson-Billings, comes in. And so we've already began work with culturally responsive pedagogy in all of our schools, and what we're adding to that is really kind of bringing up the differentiated instruction so that when students have individualized needs, we can begin to build the capacity of teachers to address that, not only in their classrooms, but using some of the digital resources that we have. And so differentiated instruction is probably one of the more challenging things that teachers have to do, because it's hard when you're looking at a classroom of 20, 25 students and trying to not only use the data to figure out what the individual needs are in the spaces of struggle, but actually prescribing and managing that space with small groups within your classroom to do that. So that's why we focused on differentiated instruction, really around our disability and our racial disparities. And the third one, so that was about using the strategy, but of course making sure it's data informed. And then the third one is that in a district our size, we need to begin to learn from spaces that are working. So when we've reviewed the data, we've found some pockets of success where we've seen some schools that had more students on grade level from the initial CDT. We've had some schools that have had stronger success with African American students over white students. And so we want to learn from those spaces. And we understand that although it's third grade, there was something that was happening in first grade and second grade that's building foundational skills. And so we want to go and learn from those schools so that we can share best practices, because that's a normalized construct in any school district about how you build capacity is you study, and then you identify those practices and you try to bring them to others to build capacity. So those are the three strategies in sort of a more in-depth verbal explanation.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I was wondering, when we look at, many of the strategies require teacher observations. And in my experience, sometimes that is not, it's not always a helpful practice if the observer is not well-versed in what should be happening and can't communicate those things. So what's happening so is it always principals who are doing the observations? And what is happening to prepare them to do that well?
Great questions. So before any of the observations take place, there's a learning space through professional learning for not only principals, but our coaches and our curriculum and instruction staff, so that we're creating those barometers of alignment and coherence with the work. Of course, principals are ultimately charged with evaluating teacher practice. However, when we think about the observations, we're talking about support observations from our coaches. We're talking about folks in our curriculum and instruction department coming to do observations and also modeling lessons, as well as principals coming to see specific things around, lesson design or supporting differentiated instruction. And that is the role of the principal, to observe, but also to provide feedback to help to improve practice and also celebrate those areas of strength. So principal observations is a normalized practice of teacher evaluation and teacher support, but also there are tiered observations too that are supported through our curriculum instruction department and our coaches as well. But before any of that happens, we need to level set, and that's where the professional learning takes place.
And that's happening now.
That's what we have started that process through this process. It's not completely developed yet, but we are in process.
We're here, we might as well ask questions. So first, I appreciate you explaining the acronyms, because I was sitting at home trying to think what a CDT was, and I figured someone would tell me. But could you give us, so I think most of us kind of get what, PSSAs, we understand the standardized testing. Talk us through kind of what is the classroom diagnostic tool. How does it work? How does it project or rate students' abilities?
Yes, so the classroom diagnostic tools, affectionately called CDTs, it's a diagnostic assessment to support teachers with decision-making. And they're aligned to the state standards and also to the eligible content, which are in total alignment with what students are assessed on PSSA. So third grade is the introduction to students with this standardized test world at the state level. And so what the CDT does is it provides some diagnostic information for teachers around how students are performing. And they report them in several bands. So some talk about whether they're at the very low end of the band, whether they're on grade level, or whether if they were to take the PSSA, they would likely be proficient or advanced. Now, it is not a predictive assessment, and CDT makes sure that they use that caveat, but it is a diagnostic assessment with alignment to the same state standards, the same eligible content that's expected at that grade level. And eligible content are really just an identification of specific skills and to what extent do they need to have mastery at a particular grade level.
Okay, so is it written? Is it computer, online?
It's online. It's
Okay.
it's a computer-based assessment. And so once they do it, they can get that data back quickly. And teachers can get that information back. Principals can get it through a portal to support what decisions they actually make. And so we started that 2 years ago. And we will continue that work of creating that alignment and coherence between what students should know, understand, and are able to do. The
Okay.
DIBELS, on the other hand, is around specific things around building learning to read. So those are more about, fluency, phonemic awareness, things like that. So what you have in third grade is this merge of all of the work that you've done from the beginning of your educational experience and getting you ready to learn to read, to this space now where you have to elevate not only learning to read, but actually reading to learn through comprehension, writing, showing understanding in multiple ways. And so that's why the science of reading has those three different components around the foundational skills, what we call foundational skills, the reading and comprehension, and the writing,
Okay, that makes sense.
if that was helpful.
I think so.
Okay.
I'm a visual learner, so it's always easier for me to see it happening than to read about it. But, so, I think we talked about this before as we were putting these goals together, right? The big challenge with third grade reading as an assessment is that every year you have a new set of students, right? And so how does the team go about kind of addressing that kind of unique challenge, knowing that, this year's results is not, will not necessarily correlate with next year's results since you have a whole new class of third graders coming in?
Yeah, I'm glad you called that out, because a lot of times when we do look at data, people forget that third grade scores are really not third grade scores every year because there's a different cohort of students. However, what the hope is that through the teaching and learning process, that you build capacity around identifying where you see gaps, where you see skill deficiencies, where you see strengths and areas of growth, so that teachers are better equipped to address all of the different concerns that they see in them, and hope that they can use that skill set, the tools that we have in place, and ultimately a mindset for confidence and competence around teaching students to read and actually allowing them to elevate themselves. So we hope that every year, as teachers build their skill set and their toolkit, that they can really impact change with students as they change. But you're right, every year we have third grade, it's a different cohort of students. So we may have some, differentiated results. However, we try to build capacity so that we can continually show growth, knowing that that's the hand we've been dealt around assessments.
And then obviously, I mean, you're starting, I'm assuming that this data you gave us is this year's third graders?
Yes, that's the first of 3 CDT assessments. So this is them beginning third grade without learning all of the third grade content, but we still need to use that data to inform our next steps.
Okay. So then I guess where my mind goes next is like, what do we need to do in kindergarten, first and second grade that gets our kids when they start third grade in a better starting position? Because, to go from 3.8% likely proficient to actually getting to proficient at a significant level seems like a big jump.
And so that's why our third strategy, I think, is so important, because sometimes when we think about third grade, we can't start with third grade. We have to go back to what's happening in our kindergarten, our first and our second grade classrooms to see how are we building foundational skills. So in the lesson design space, obviously, there's more of a focus on foundational skills than the reading and the writing at the very beginning of the journey. But what are these best practices that we're seeing that probably are not translating to all of our schools that we can take from successful spaces? And that's what that DIBELS data gives us to support us with our action and decision-making.
Okay. And then to take that one step further, then what is the next step then that helps us to maintain that momentum as our kids go? Because then they're not tested again until it's 6th or 8th grade?
No, actually, in ELA, they're tested every year.
Oh, good. So
Three
how do we
through
keep
eighth
that,
grade.
how do we
Yeah.
keep that going so we don't lose it? Because we
Yes.
know that by the time a lot of our kids get to 9th grade, then they're behind again at
Absolutely.
significant levels.
And one of the other challenges too is as they change grade levels, the eligible content changes. So, and I hate to use a math example in a reading space, but if you're learning how to count numbers, one grade level may say by the tens place, then the next one will say by the thousands, then the next one will say by the millions, and so the expectation for growth developmentally around curriculum, it changes at grade levels as well. So it pushes us to really kind of analyze how well we know eligible content and how can we shape our instruction to make sure that they're meeting minimum standards and then pushing them to elevate beyond that.
Okay. So many questions, they just keep coming. So, so when we find those spaces or teachers that are excelling, how do we get those teachers in front of more teachers to help them kind of learn that skill?
So I think there are a variety of ways. I think if the culture is there, that they can receive that, like, hey, here's a teacher who's doing something well. But that's the beauty of having professional learning communities, where the idea is that as professionals, we get together to learn, to grow, to share our vulnerabilities, to share our strengths, and that we can all build and receive that to strengthen our own practice. It's not perfect in all spaces, but that's the whole concept of professional learning communities, is as professionals, we can sit down and have these difficult conversations, we can have challenging conversations, we can get to spaces where we expose ourselves to our vulnerabilities, and that takes time. It takes a lot of trust, but it also takes someone seeing the results and being able to honor that there must be something that they're doing differently in their practice that's building those results. And our stance is that we need to go and see it so we can share it widely, and move people along, starting first, obviously, with the willing, and building those, accountability structures and those transparent spaces where we can build capacity. Because, we can't all get there at the same time, but we still need to be growing our practice for the students that we have.
Well, and I think it takes both a self-awareness and a willingness on, the educator's side to say, okay, I'm not as good at this as I'd like to be, or my kids are not kind of taking from what I'm trying to teach, and so I need to be willing to go and learn from others. I think we get that, obviously anybody that we send down to Atlanta to see the Ron Clark Academy, they come back and go, this is great. But we should be able to do that here. We should have people coming to Pittsburgh figuring out how we're doing the things we're doing. All right, last question, because as a board, we don't have much, if any, say on how that, that the in-school stuff works. But what we do have say on is ensuring that you have the resources necessary to actually do it. So what resources are needed that are missing to ensure that this strategy is implemented across the board and done well?
So the one I'm going to go to first is the number one go-to that I'm not sure that our board can fix immediately is time. Is time to really learn, time to grow, time to be vulnerable, and time to try things without criticism or consequence. And I think there are a lot of our teachers in space that struggle with feeling free to try things because they feel like there will be a consequence. And so we have to build that capacity so that they can try and fail, and that's this idea of the continuous improvement process, so that they can try, plan it, do it, study or check it, and act on it and say, okay, this worked well, I'm gonna keep this practice, or it didn't work well and I have to let that go and try again. But time is something important, and when I say time, I mean time to learn, because our schedule is not designed in the best way that gives teachers time and space to learn. Time to collaborate extensively, and in education, that's not something that we've mastered. But I would start with time as the ultimate resource. I mean, we have intervention programs to support it, but we need to try to support teachers with making those decisions about the intervention programs and how they support students and checking that data, and even time to analyze data and to be comprehensive in that approach. And so we're doing the best that we can with the time we have allocated, but time would be the number one resource that I think any professional in the education realm would probably ask for first.
That is my last question.
I have another question. I'm really interested in learning about professional learning communities, what they look like when they when that happens in a teacher's day. I'm also interested in learning about what's the professional learning in central office, what is that I guess it's executive level professional learning.
Yes, I'll start first with the question on the school level. So professional learning communities at the school level look very different. Just by contractual structure, high school teachers have a time built into their schedule by their design. Our elementaries currently do not. And so it looks very different around the time and space. They have, at the high school level, there's a PD period every day built into that schedule. So the flexibility and the autonomy for high schools to get together and really live that vision for professional learning communities on a daily basis can be achieved. In the elementary school, it's a lot different. Also, the reality of schools today, when people are sick, when we have vacancies, when people are out, that reality is those professional learning communities, although may be well-intended, may not always happen because that teacher may be covering a class and not have that time to actually engage in professional learning communities. So that's still a challenge that we have in Pittsburgh, like we have across the country, of vacancies, people sick and on leaves. And it creates a conundrum of us really kind of elevating that, especially on the elementary level. And in the middle schools, it's sort of in between. So there are time and spaces that they do it, but it may be once a week in the elementary school versus in the high schools where they're every day. At the central office space, we're always invested in learning and growing. We have what's called our leadership team, and we also have an academic cabinet. So the academic cabinet is focused on a blending of our assistant superintendents, our central office team, and our curriculum and instruction team, working together to learn, to grow, to implement, and to execute core initiatives, thinking about the participants that it impacts and affects, how we're communicating, and what we're doing to support those structures and building our capacity so that I can stand in front of you with some level of fluency and confidence and competence around what I'm talking about instructionally. The leadership team is the same space. So we have people in our leadership team that come from different departments, but the expectation is that learning still happens because all of our work is focused on student outcomes. So if we're not about that work and being very clear about how our work connects to improving student outcomes, whether you're in the facilities space, the financial space, the technology space, the curriculum and instruction space, et cetera, that has been our work. So we've invested in building our capacity as well so that we can be impactful in our thinking, in our decision-making around moving student outcomes. And so that's the major cultural shift that we're going through, but it involves us building our capacity and our knowledge base around literacy, around mathematics and all the other areas. So we're trying to build our expertise.
And do you have a sense of districts that are doing this really well? And are you modeling anything that you're doing after what they're doing?
So one of the things, being a part of the Council of Great City Schools network, is we have, meetings regularly where we get to share, where we get to talk, and obviously conferences when we go in to build capacity and learn and create networks. And so that's something that I have always invested in, is trying to build my net worth through my networks. And so that's something that I continue to do, and I encourage all of our central office staff to build their capacity. So I welcome that. You cannot build if you're not in a learning space, and you always have to be a lifelong learner in this profession as things evolve all the time. Learning changes, information changes, skill set changes, and so we have to be fluid and just responsive to those changing dynamics and always position ourselves. So when I come to you in spaces of, we need to go and learn here, we need to do these things, that's the why. That's the why behind the what. Because as student lives change, as student outcomes change, we need to have the capacity to lead this work with a sense of knowledge, skills, and wisdom.
And my last question, one of the things you talked about was looking at best practices within the district, looking at places where, especially in this particular instance, literacy is being done well, and children are able to grasp concepts and pass tests, et cetera. Are you looking at best practices outside of the district at all?
I am, but like I said, with the continuous improvement process, we wanted to start with a small win. So we wanted to look in-house first to see what we're doing, but we are always delving deep into the research into what's happening with best literacy practices. Our CNR team is doing that. Our professional learning department is doing that. And even at the leadership level with our assistant superintendents, we're always doing that as well to build capacity and be exposed to what's happening across the country. But specifically, just for this particular beginning stage, I wanted to focus in on the places that we can go and touch immediately to kind of learn first. But that is always a part of our process of building our capacity to seeing what's happening across the country and, to be honest, across the world.
I have
Go
one
ahead.
more. Are you done?
Oh, yeah, I'm good.
Oh, I was
Go ahead.
making sure you didn't have, I don't want to like jump on.
No, it's fine.
Because my question, it's a little different. So, you know, all of these things are so high stakes and high pressure. How do we bring the enjoyment and fun back into this process? Not just for our kids, but for our educators. Like, how do we make it enjoyable to go through this year in and year out so that we continue to want to do it and do it better?
So I think the joy comes in the learning process, but the reality is that test scores are what make the morning paper. And that's the hand that we've been dealt for many years. And fortunately or unfortunately, because we're the largest district in the area, we get the microscope. So although I celebrate those spaces of joy and I want to elevate joy and push that in the learning, I also have to be realistic about the hand that we've been dealt, where people speak to our data and make assertions about our students. And so that's the battle that we're fighting, creating joy, but also being accountable for outcomes with the hand that we've been dealt. And I am one to, the first person to say that students can show that they've learned things in multiple different ways. But, right now, that's the hand that we've been dealt by our state, is PSSAs, govern what students know, understand, and do. And in high school is Keystones, or the new Act 158 graduation requirements. And so I elevate joy, but at the same time, I have to live in a reality-based space around accountability.
Sure. I mean, the challenge, and, I went through this with my daughter, who loves to read now, but, when she was not a good reader, the remedy was, well, read more. And when you're not good at something or don't think you're good at something, and then the only remedy is, well, you just have to do more of it, it's really hard. So I'm curious, is there, have we kind of thought about what types of books our kids are reading? Are we bringing in magazines and comic books and different things that will engage them in this reading process that's different than, Shakespeare or whatever we're teaching our kids to
Absolutely.
read?
And I'm glad you brought that up because, that's an American system norm where we always kind of view Shakespeare as being well-educated in the literature when we live in Pittsburgh with August Wilson. And so, my hope is that in Pittsburgh, we can make that transition because students need to see what they will be. And so if they're not seeing books that show them, I don't know if I would be attracted to that as well. I guess I think of my sister who's a really avid reader, and I guess for her, and I'm dating myself now with Harlequin romances, but for me, I always looked to, there was a time where I read just for information and not for pleasure because I wanted to see myself. If it was something where I saw myself and the story was about me, I could connect with it. And I think our students are no different in that space. And so we've gone to a number of lengths to kind of change what it is that our students see in the literature and what they see in the classrooms. But like everything else, we have a ways to go in just building reading for enjoyment. And also, students need to understand how to read because a lot of their assessments are based in not just reading, but understanding, comprehending, and being able to, show what they actually know in multiple ways. So, those are the multiple facets and layers of education today that, we continue to struggle with, but we continue to push forward and build capacity so that our teachers are more skilled to meet the needs of the students in front of them day after day.
I don't know if anything online? Okay. All right. I have a closing question.
Okay.
For my question, I do just want to underscore that or acknowledge, heard about the fear of teachers and that accountability piece. These are certainly not what we want the scores to be. And also, it's so important that we name the reality and that we are all together addressing the reality that we're in. And I think that that is a really commendable collective set of actions to do, and hope that the board can continue to model that is an okay place to be. I'm curious, I have the kind of the plus minus question, starting on the asset side. What are you most excited about, the efforts to date to achieve this third grade ELA goal? And then on the flip side, what do you think is the greatest barrier to achieving this goal with what you know now?
So this will be an off the top of my head answer. So you'll get an off the top of my head thinking. I think the greatest asset is that there is a willingness to do better by all involved. Even though it may not show up in the data, our teachers, our principals, our staff are all on board about making improvements for the lives of our students. So I view that as an asset. I view people that come to work every day bringing their best selves. And I celebrate them, I honor and I value that, because urban education is hard. It's tough. And especially in spaces where you have so many multiple challenges in front of you daily, I celebrate that and I view that as an asset in the Pittsburgh Public Schools, regardless of what anyone else thinks. I think our challenges, again, I would say, go back to time never being on our side. This mandate to push forward despite all of these other conditions that come into the educational space that become the responsibility of educators. And so if there was something that I would change, it would be that. But I don't have a magic wand, and I don't believe in the fairy dust, even though I've seen many movies that utilize it. But it's just hard work, and I just ask for patience and grace from those who are in this space of doing this challenging work. And I wish people would step to that space with the same level of patience, tolerance, and grace for the hard work of being an educator in 2024.
Well, if there are no other questions, on behalf of the board, thank you, Dr. Walters. And the meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening.
Thank you.